for a Game Boy, you better believe you can spend your whole life playing Game Boy! Game Boy!
Remember when PCs or computers were as big as these? Well, not many people do, so therefore they've created a very large retro gaming museum here in Zwolle in the Netherlands. And today we're going to delve into the history of handheld gaming and, more importantly, how the Game Boy came to be and how it is going to become in the future. So join me on a trip across memory lane in 1965 as we go from these things to very tiny handheld computers. This is a special Massive DMG episode dedicated to the handheld game consoles. As you can see, most of the computers were analog back in the day, and if you thought that just having one link cable was difficult for a Game Boy, imagine having a couple of those for basic computing purposes. So yeah, things go from large to smaller over time, and yeah, we'll see where it ends up. The first handheld game console to ever use cartridge-based games was the Milton Bradley Microvision, and we've got one right here. Basically, what you could do is you could swap out the faceplates, like so, and you could plug in another faceplate, which was incidentally another game with different controls as well. So for each game there was a different screen and different controls. So this is the predecessor of the Nintendo Game Boy, so it's very fun to actually hold it in hand and see how it worked. But unfortunately there wasn't much support for this system for third parties and other people making games, so it flopped in 1981. Thankfully, based on this technology, later on Nintendo created the Nintendo Game Boy. The second game console that started using removable game cartridges is the Game Pocket computer, created by Epoch in 1984. As you can see, you can actually get the cartridges out and plug a new one in. Unfortunately, only 5 games were made for it, and it wasn't a big success outside of Japan. But still, it's part of handheld history. So this is the Nintendo Virtual Boy. It might not be a very portable console, but it is the next iteration from Game Boy to Game Boy Advance. It was a big flop, as you can see. It's quite bulky. It did make use of multiple control pads, and it was not so much a flop as it was a disaster for Nintendo, because they wanted to go into the virtual reality niche that wasn't really there. It was starting up, but it was a bit too early for them to actually sell on a 3D point. People were complaining that they were getting headaches from it. Games weren't all that cool. There were only a couple of 2 or 3 games that were actually fun to play, and it soon died out. So here's a kiosk version, which is really rare to see, and I'll be very gentle with it as well. But later on, people also, after the complaints that people were getting headaches, warning stickers were put on that little kids shouldn't play this. And since these toys were marketed for kids, it didn't sell well, because people thought, well, if it's not suitable for kids 7 or older, then how are my teens going to react to it? Are they going to get headaches? Are their eyes going to be damaged? And there was a bit of a scare about that, and people just didn't buy it. So dark page in the history of the Game Boy or the Boy series, but nonetheless a very fun console to have and to collect for. And it's a very small library, so it's easy to fit in. If you grew up with the Nintendo Game Boy, you probably know that getting a proper view on your screen was very difficult because of the fact that the screen was not backlit. After many years, Nintendo finally decided to create a handheld console with a backlit screen that allowed you to play in the dark or whatever you want. It also included a battery pack that made sure that you weren't dependent on any batteries or sorts. You could just recharge it and have it done with. Furthermore, it's very compact, so you can always bring one with you. As a response to this, they also came out with a Game Boy Micro, but unfortunately, because of the fact that it had to be so small, it cannot play backwards compatible games such as the old Game Boy games or the Game Boy Color games. The backlit screen is smaller, but it also provides a higher resolution, so the image is sharper, but yeah, you kind of have to do with a lot smaller screen. Regardless of the fact that this was smaller and more compact, not many people actually bought this and decided to either go for a SP or for the later version, the Nintendo DS, which we'll show you in a bit. As I said earlier, they decided to go with the Nintendo DS. This is the early version, the bulkier version. Also backlit screens, but this time it added another touch screen that allowed for extra interaction with games and such. No longer were there very bulky cartridges, there were thin cartridges that you could put in the back. It did have backwards compatibility with the Nintendo Game Boy Advance, but again not with the Game Boy Color and Game Boy, or the normal Game Boy games, the same as the Micro. Yeah, they got bored of this design as well, and then they moved over to the DS Lite. So as you can see, the DS Lite was a bit more pocketable and a bit less bulky than its predecessor. It still has the Game Boy Advance slot, but it's a smaller slot, and it came with a little thingamajig to fill it up to make it look nice. Apart from that, the resolution was increased and the processor was faster. Most people who currently own a DS remember this one instead of the bulkier one, but yeah, this looks much sleeker, so I can imagine why. It also came in a variety of colors, as you can see here, and yeah, onto the 3DS. And as it went in history as well, I forgot the Nintendo DSi, which is basically a DS Lite upgrade with an internal camera and also added a faster processor. It also came with additional software and access to a sort of eShop, but it wasn't very popular and was easily observed by the Nintendo 3DS that came later. So now we've come to the Nintendo 3DS, which is a bit of a foray into the 3D world again, as we saw with the Virtual Boy, but this time on a pocketable handheld and one that's not going to give you headaches. This is the small version, so the first version. It was with dual cameras as well, and yeah, basically it allowed for more sorts of gameplay with the 3D slider, with the added joypad, and it also lost the ability to play Game Boy Advance games on it as well. Later on, the 3DS XL arrived with a larger screen, a bit faster processor that had to be because of the fact that the screen was larger, and again, no compatibility with Game Boy Advance games.